The diplomatic hall of the Federation Council stretched before me, like a cathedral of glass and starlight, its vaulted ceilings so high they seemed to touch the edge of space itself. I, Ambassador Kelrith of the Vornak Sovereignty, stood at my full height of 9 feet, my 4 arms crossed in what I believed to be an impressive display of authority. Around me, delegates from across the known galaxy gathered in their assigned sections, each species more imposing than the last. The Thorians, with their stone-like exoskeletons, clustered near the western platform. The Meridian Collective floated in their containment spheres, bioluminescent bodies pulsing with barely contained energy. And then there were the humans. Specifically, there was her. She stood barely 5 feet tall, if that, with short auburn hair that caught the overhead lights like copper wire. Her name, according to my briefing documents, was Lieutenant Commander Mira Fontaine, representing Earth's Defense Coalition. She wore a simple Navy uniform with minimal decoration, and when she walked, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to announce their presence. I'll admit, I found it amusing. "Is that truly their representative?" I muttered to my attaché, Vrel, who stood dutifully at my side. "I've seen juvenile Vornaks, with more physical presence." Vrel's mandibles clicked nervously, a habit he had when he wanted to disagree, but knew better. "Ambassador, the briefing files suggested that human combat effectiveness is not correlated with their physical dimensions." I waved one of my hands dismissively. The gesture sent my ceremonial robes billowing, which I enjoyed immensely. Briefing files are compiled by analysts who've never set foot in actual combat. I've fought in the Kaldrex Wars, survived the siege of Morthan Prime, and commanded fleets that would make these soft-skinned mammals weep. Physical presence matters, Vrel. It always has. The opening ceremonies began with the typical pomp and circumstance. High Chancellor Morthus, a Drakniri whose species had founded the Federation some 3,000 years ago, raised his 6-fingered hands for silence. Delegates of the Federation, his voice resonated through the hall's acoustic enhancement systems, we gather in these troubled times to address the growing threat at our borders. The Kreth Imperium continues its expansion, and their latest weapon, the Titan-class war machines, have devastated 17 colony worlds in the past cycle alone. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. I'd heard the reports, of course. The Kreth had developed something truly terrifying. Mobile fortresses the size of small cities, equipped with plasma cannons that could crack planetary crusts, and shields that laughed at conventional weapons. 3 Titan-class machines had been confirmed, and rumor suggested more were being constructed. "We must unite our forces," Morthus continued, "pool our resources and military expertise. To coordinate this effort, we will establish a joint tactical command. Each major power will submit their finest strategist." I straightened, preparing to announce the Vornak Sovereignty's candidate, when something unexpected happened. The human delegation, all 3 of them, remained seated. Chancellor Morthus's eye stalks swiveled toward them. "The Terran Defense Coalition abstains from this decision?" Lieutenant Commander Fontaine stood slowly, and I had to suppress a laugh. She looked like a child standing before a tribunal of giants. When she spoke, however, her voice carried clearly through the hall, amplified not by technology, but by pure projection. "With respect, Chancellor, Earth declines to submit a candidate for the joint command structure." She paused, letting the shocked silence settle. "We will, however, offer our services as independent tactical consultants." The hall erupted. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up. I found myself standing again, all 4 arms spread wide. "This is absurd," I bellowed, my voice cutting through the din like a plasma blade. "The Terrans send a representative who barely reaches my chest, and she has the audacity to refuse integration into the command structure. What possible tactical expertise could your species offer that would justify such arrogance?" Fontaine turned to face me directly. Her eyes, I noticed with some surprise, showed no fear, no intimidation. Just a calm, almost amused assessment, as if I were a particularly interesting specimen in a laboratory. "Ambassador Kelrith, is it?" she said, her tone conversational. "I've read about the Vornak's military doctrine. Very impressive. Overwhelming force, layered defensive positions, victory through attrition, and superior numbers. It served you well for, what, 4 centuries?" "5 centuries," I corrected, though I felt a prickle of unease. "And yes, it has brought us glory across 100 battlefields." "I'm sure it has," she smiled, and something about that smile made my secondary stomach clench. "Tell me, Ambassador, have you ever fought something that didn't fight back the way you expected? Something that changed the rules while you were busy following them?" "Combat has rules," I replied stiffly. "Tactics, strategy, logistics. These are universal constants. The Kreth may have built impressive weapons, but weapons can be countered with superior weapons and better positioning." "Can they?" She tilted her head slightly. "What if I told you that I've personally disabled a Titan-class war machine?" The hall went silent. Absolutely. Completely silent. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "You? You've disabled a Titan-class machine?" "Not just disabled, Ambassador. Destroyed." She walked toward the center of the hall, her small frame somehow commanding the space as if it belonged to her. "It happened 8 months ago, during the Kreth assault on Pergamon Station. I was commanding a garrison of 43 soldiers, defending a civilian evacuation point. The Kreth deployed a Titan-class unit. Designation, Worldbreaker 7. Vrel leaned close to me, his voice a whisper. "Ambassador, this matches the reports from Pergamon. The station was expected to fall within hours, but somehow the evacuation completed successfully." I waved him silent, my attention fixed on the small human who stood in the spotlight like an actor on a stage. "The Worldbreaker 7, Fontaine continued, stood 400 meters tall. It had shields rated to withstand orbital bombardment, plasma cannons with a range of 20 kilometers, and an army of support drones. Our heaviest weapons were anti-vehicle railguns and portable missile launchers. By every tactical assessment, we should have been vaporized in the first exchange." "So how did you survive?" The question came from Delegate Horthax of the Meridian Collective, his translated voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Fontaine's smile widened. "We didn't fight it the way it expected to be fought. See, the Kreth designed the Titan-class machines to be invulnerable to conventional warfare. They assumed their enemies would try to match firepower with firepower, shields with shields. They assumed wrong. She produced a small holographic projector, and suddenly, the space above the assembly floor filled with an image of Pergamon Station, a sprawling orbital platform built into the husk of a dead moon. Then the image zoomed out, showing the approach of something massive. The Titan-class war machine moved through space like a mountain with engines, its surface bristling with weapons, its shields shimmering with barely contained energy. I'd seen the footage before, of course, but seeing it rendered in such detail sent a shiver down my spine. No wonder 17 colonies had fallen. "We evacuated the civilians to the station's core," Fontaine narrated, her voice steady as the hologram showed tiny figures rushing through corridors. Then we did something the Kreth didn't anticipate. We let it land. You let it land? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Why would you allow a Titan-class machine to establish a ground position? Because, Ambassador, once it landed, it stopped being a spaceship and became a building. And humans are very, very good at fighting in buildings. The hologram shifted, showing the Titan-class machine settling onto the station's surface, its massive legs deploying like a spider finding purchase. Swarms of Kreth warriors poured from its access ports, securing the perimeter exactly as tactical doctrine would suggest. The Kreth followed standard operating procedure, Fontaine continued. They established defensive positions, set up supply lines from the Titan's internal reserves, and began their methodical advance toward the core. What they didn't know was that we'd rigged every corridor, every junction, every maintenance shaft with surprises. The hologram showed the first Kreth squad advancing through a corridor. Then the walls exploded, not with the force of explosives, but with rapid decompression, venting the atmosphere and scattering the soldiers like leaves in a hurricane. We used the station's own systems against them, Fontaine explained. Life support became a weapon. We'd open a door here, creating pressure differentials that would throw soldiers off their feet. We'd superheat a section there, making the metal floors hot enough to cook them in their armor. We turned gravity generators into traps, cycling them on and off to disorient and break their formation. I watched, fascinated despite myself, as the hologram showed small teams of human soldiers moving through the chaos like ghosts, striking from unexpected angles, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. But the Titan itself remained a threat, I pointed out. These are harassment tactics, not victory strategies. You're right, Fontaine agreed, which is why, while we were keeping their ground forces busy, a team of 8 engineers and myself went outside. Outside? Vrel's voice cracked. You went EVA while a Titan-class machine was actively engaged? We went underneath it, actually. The hologram zoomed in, showing 9 tiny figures in powered armor, crawling along the station's outer hull, then up into the shadows beneath the massive machine. See, the Titan's shields are designed to deflect external attacks. Missiles, plasma fire, kinetic projectiles, they all get stopped or dispersed, but the shields have to leave gaps for the landing gear. Otherwise, the machine couldn't make contact with surfaces. The hologram showed the human team reaching one of the massive leg joints, a connection point where the Titan's main body met one of its support struts. They began placing charges, small devices that seemed laughably inadequate against such a massive structure. Those are shaped charges, Fontaine said, anticipating the question. Military grade, yes, but nothing special. What made them effective was placement. We put them at the structural weak points, the places where the Titan's own weight would work against it. I leaned forward, my earlier amusement completely forgotten. You tried to collapse it? Not tried, Ambassador. Succeeded. Her voice carried a note of pride now, earned and unashamed. We detonated the charges simultaneously, taking out 3 of its 6 landing struts. The Titan's weight did the rest. The hologram showed the explosion, silent in the void of space, but devastating in its effect. The massive machine tilted, slowly at first, then faster as its structural integrity failed. It crashed into the station's surface with enough force to register on seismic sensors, its shields flickering and dying as power conduits snapped like threads. Once it was down, Fontaine continued, once it was vulnerable, we called in an orbital strike from our remaining ships. They'd been holding position, waiting for exactly this moment. The Titan's shields couldn't reform in time. It was destroyed completely. The hologram faded, leaving only the soft, ambient light of the diplomatic hall. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Chancellor Morthas broke the silence first. 43 soldiers and 9 engineers against a Titan-class war machine. The casualty report? We lost 6 soldiers and 1 engineer, Fontaine said quietly. Their names are inscribed on the memorial at Pergamon Station. They died buying time for 3,000 civilians to escape. I consider that an acceptable ratio. I felt something uncomfortable stirring in my chest, something that might have been shame if I'd been willing to acknowledge it. You use unconventional tactics. We use effective tactics, Fontaine corrected. Ambassador Kelrith, you mentioned earlier that I'm small. You're absolutely right. Compared to most species in this chamber, humans are physically unremarkable. We're not the strongest, not the fastest, not the toughest. But we've survived on a death world where everything else was bigger, faster, and meaner than us. We learned to fight smart because we couldn't fight fair. She walked closer to my position, and I found myself taking an involuntary step backward. Her presence, small as she was, seemed to fill the space. The Kreth think their Titan-class machines are invincible because they've only fought enemies who play by traditional rules, she said. They expect massed fleet actions, siege warfare, attrition battles. Earth can teach you to fight differently. We can show you how to turn the enemy's strengths into weaknesses, how to win battles you should lose on paper. And if we refuse this consultation? The question came from Ambassador Threxis of the Thorian Enclaves, his voice rumbling like grinding stone. Fontaine shrugged, a very human gesture. Then you fight the Kreth your way, with your traditional tactics and your conventional strategies. And maybe you win, eventually. Or maybe you lose 17 more colonies, then 34, then 100. That's your choice to make. She turned back to Chancellor Morthas. Earth doesn't ask to lead your military. We're too new to the galactic community for that kind of authority. But we offer our expertise freely. Use it or don't. I stood there, all 4 of my arms hanging uselessly at my sides, feeling something I hadn't felt since the Kaldrex Wars. Uncertainty. Could she be right? Could this tiny species, these physically unimpressive newcomers, truly have something to teach us? The Chancellor's eye stalks shifted, looking between Fontaine and the assembled delegates. This council will take a brief recess to consider the Terran proposal. We reconvene in 1 standard hour. As the delegates began to disperse, I found myself walking toward Fontaine. She noticed my approach and waited, her expression neutral. "Lieutenant Commander," I said, forcing respect into my tone, "I believe I owe you an apology for my earlier comments about your stature." She smiled again, that same unsettling smile. "No apology necessary, Ambassador. You made an assessment based on physical appearance. It's a common mistake." "How did you know?" I asked. "How did you know the Titan could be brought down that way?" "Because I studied it," she replied simply. "Before the battle, during the evacuation, I pulled up every piece of intelligence we had on Titan-class machines. I looked at their design philosophy, their tactical deployments, their successful engagements, and I realized something. They'd never lost because they'd never fought anyone who was willing to get close enough to exploit their weaknesses. Everyone stayed at range, tried to match firepower, and died for it. So you did the unexpected. I did what needed to be done." She glanced around the hall, at the departing delegates, at the vast space designed to make visitors feel small. "Ambassador Kelrith, can I share something with you?" Off the record?" I gestured for her to continue. "The Kreth Imperium isn't just building Titan-class machines," she said quietly. "According to our intelligence, they're developing something worse. Something they're calling the Apocalypse class. It makes the Titans look like scout vehicles." My blood went cold. "How do you know this?" "Because we captured one of their engineers during the Pergamon battle. Before he died, he talked. And what he described," she shook her head. "Let's just say that if the Kreth deploy an Apocalypse-class weapon, traditional warfare won't just fail. It'll be irrelevant." "And you have a plan to fight such a thing?" Her smile returned, but this time it carried no warmth, only a predator's certainty. "Ambassador, humans have been fighting things bigger and stronger than us since we lived in caves and hunted animals with sharpened sticks. We've gotten very, very good at killing giants. The Kreth are about to learn that size doesn't matter nearly as much as they think it does." She walked away then, leaving me standing alone in the emptying hall, my earlier confidence shattered like glass. Vrel approached cautiously. "Ambassador? What are your thoughts?" I watched Fontaine's retreating form, that small, unremarkable figure who had stood against a Titan-class war machine and won. "I think, Vrel," I said slowly, "that I have severely underestimated the humans, and I suspect the Kreth are making the same mistake. Should we support their proposal?" I thought about the Apocalypse-class weapons, about the 17 colonies already lost, about the way Fontaine had moved through that battle with the kind of tactical brilliance that came from fighting for survival every day of your species' existence. "Yes," I decided, "we support them, and then we learn everything they're willing to teach us. Because if there's one thing I learned today, it's that being big doesn't make you invincible. Sometimes the smallest opponent is the most dangerous." Vrel's mandibles clicked in what might have been agreement. As we left the hall to prepare for the reconvening session, I couldn't shake the image of Fontaine standing in that spotlight, describing how she'd brought down a mountain with nothing but courage, cleverness, and a willingness to fight differently. The Vornak's sovereignty had won battles through strength and numbers. The humans, it seemed, won battles through sheer, terrifying ingenuity. And I was very glad they were on our side. For now. The recess ended with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the diplomatic hall's very walls. I returned to my position, Vrel trailing behind me with data pads clutched in 3 of his smaller appendages. Around us, the other delegates filtered back in, their body language telling stories their faces, or equivalent features, tried to hide. The Thorians moved with uncharacteristic hesitance. The Meridian Collective's bioluminescence flickered in patterns I recognized as deep contemplation. Even the Drakniri chancellors, normally so assured in their ancient authority, exchanged glances that suggested uncertainty. Lieutenant Commander Fontaine sat in the human delegation section, flanked by her 2 companions. A tall man with silver-gray hair and cybernetic enhancements along his jawline, Colonel Marcus Webb according to my files, and a younger woman with dark skin and calculating eyes, Captain Nyota Okafor, their intelligence specialist. They looked relaxed, almost bored, as if the fate of multiple civilizations wasn't being decided in this room. Chancellor Morthus raised his hands once more, his ceremonial rings catching the light. "We have deliberated. Before we announce the Council's decision, Ambassador Kelrith of the Vornak's sovereignty has requested to address the Assembly." I stood, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes, sensors, and other perceptive organs focusing on me. My earlier arrogance felt like a costume I'd outgrown in the span of an hour. "Esteemed delegates," I began, keeping my voice measured, "I confess that I came to this council with certain preconceptions about our newest members. The humans arrived late to the galactic stage, their technology decades behind our own, their military comparatively small, their physical attributes, well, unremarkable. I saw Fontaine's lips quirk in a half-smile, but she didn't interrupt. I was wrong. The words tasted strange in my mouth, admission of error not being a common flavor in Vornak's culture. Not about their technology or numbers, those assessments remain accurate. But I failed to account for something that cannot be measured in weapons counts or fleet tonnage. I failed to account for adaptability. I activated my own holographic display, showing the current map of Kreth-controlled space. Red zones spread like a virus across the Outer Rim territories. The Kreth Imperium operates on a doctrine of technological superiority, I continued. They build bigger ships, stronger shields, more devastating weapons. And we, the gathered civilizations of this federation, have responded in kind. We've tried to match them, advance for advance, weapon for weapon. The result? 17 colonies lost, thousands of ships destroyed, millions of casualties. The hall remained silent, but I felt the shift in attention, the way beings lean forward when someone speaks an uncomfortable truth. The humans offer something different, not because they're more advanced, but because they're not. They've had to survive against superior odds their entire existence. First on their homeworld, now in space. They don't fight to match their enemies. They fight to exploit them. I gestured toward Fontaine. This delegate, who I foolishly dismissed based on her physical size, destroyed a Titan-class war machine with 43 soldiers and creative thinking. How many of our fleets could make that claim? How many of our grand military academies teach the kind of tactical flexibility that victory required? Ambassador Threxus stood, his massive stone form grinding slightly as he moved. Ambassador Kelrith, are you suggesting we abandon centuries of military doctrine on the advice of newcomers? I'm suggesting, Ambassador Threxus, that our centuries of military doctrine are exactly what the Kreth expect us to follow. They've built their entire war machine around countering conventional warfare. The lieutenant commander's point stands: we need to stop fighting the war the Kreth want us to fight, and start fighting the war they can't anticipate. I sat down, my heart's pounding in a way they hadn't since actual combat. Vrel leaned close, his mandibles clicking rapidly in what I'd learned to recognize as approval mixed with shock. Chancellor Morthus's eye stalks swiveled between me and the human delegation. The Terran Defense Coalition will step forward. Fontaine stood, but this time Colonel Webb stood with her. The older man moved with the careful precision of someone who'd replaced enough body parts to qualify as a hybrid between flesh and machine. "Thank you, Chancellor," Webb said, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who'd breathed too much battlefield smoke. "Lieutenant Commander Fontaine has demonstrated what's possible with unconventional tactics, but showing you one victory isn't the same as teaching you a new way of fighting. So let me tell you about the Apocalypse-class weapons the Kreth are building." He activated a holographic display that made my earlier map look primitive. A massive construct materialized above the assembly floor, so large the hologram had to scale down repeatedly to fit it in the available space. "This," Webb continued, "is what we've managed to piece together from captured intelligence and long-range reconnaissance. The Kreth are constructing at least 3, possibly 5, Apocalypse-class mobile fortresses. Each one is 10 times the size of a Titan-class machine. Each one carries enough firepower to sterilize a planet's surface in under 6 hours. The hologram rotated, revealing weapon systems that defied reasonable military engineering. Plasma arrays that could fire in 16 directions simultaneously. Shield generators drawing power from miniature fusion cores. Drone bays that could deploy thousands of attack craft. By our calculations, Webb said, his mechanical eye glowing faintly as he processed data, a single Apocalypse-class weapon could destroy the entire Vornax home fleet in a direct engagement. 2 of them working in tandem could crack a planet's crust. 3 could end civilizations. The hall erupted in panic. Delegates shouted, translation devices squealing with overlapping voices. I felt my own composure slipping, my 4 arms gesturing wildly as I tried to process the implications. Chancellor Morthus called for order repeatedly before the chaos subsided. "You're saying we cannot win," Delegate Horthax said, his containment sphere pulsing with agitated light. "You're saying the Kreth have built something unstoppable." "No," Fontaine said, standing beside Webb. "I'm saying they've built something that can't be stopped with conventional warfare." "There's a difference." "Explain." The word came from Ambassador Iril of the Kashan Unity, a species known for their logical approach to problem-solving. Captain Okafor stood now, completing the human trio. She waved her hand, and the hologram shifted, zooming in on specific sections of the Apocalypse-class design. "Every weapon has weaknesses," Okafor said, her accent carrying traces of old Earth languages I couldn't identify. "The Apocalypse class is no exception. Its size is both its greatest strength and its fatal flaw. Something that large requires enormous amounts of power, complex logistics, thousands of crew members, and vulnerable supply lines." The hologram highlighted sections of the massive construct. Here, the primary power conduits feeding the main weapons array. Here, the life support systems that keep the crew alive. Here, the fuel processing centers that convert raw materials into usable energy. And here, she pointed to a section near the base of the structure, the command and control nexus that coordinates all operations. "You're proposing sabotage," I said, understanding dawning. "Infiltration." "We're proposing asymmetric warfare," Fontaine corrected. "The Kreth will expect a fleet engagement. They'll position their Apocalypse-class weapons in open space, surrounded by support vessels, protected by overlapping shield matrices. They'll dare us to attack them head-on, and when we do, they'll annihilate us." "So we don't attack them head-on," Webb said. "We attack their supply lines. We disrupt their logistics. We force them to spread their forces thin, protecting infrastructure, instead of massing for offensive operations." He changed the hologram again, this time showing Kreth-controlled space, with highlighted routes connecting various installations. "The Apocalypse-class weapons require exotic materials for fuel and maintenance," Webb explained. "Crystalline matrices for the shield generators, refined plasma for the weapon systems, specialized components for the drone manufacturing bays. All of this has to come from somewhere, be transported somewhere, be processed somewhere." "You want us to wage an economic war," Ambassador Iril said, her tentacles curling in what I'd learned was her species' version of a thoughtful expression. "Economic? Logistical? Psychological," Okafor confirmed. "We hit their mining operations. We interdict their transport convoys. We spread disinformation about their weapon capabilities to force them into defensive postures. And while they're scrambling to protect their infrastructure, we identify and eliminate the key personnel who understand how to operate these massive weapons." "Assassination," Ambassador Threxus rumbled. "You propose we become assassins." "I propose we become survivors," Fontaine said sharply. "Ambassador, with respect, Your people faced extinction twice in recorded history. Both times you survived by adapting, by doing things your ancestors would have considered dishonorable. You're here today because your predecessors chose survival over tradition. I'm asking you to make that choice again. Threxus sat down heavily, his stone features revealing nothing, but I sensed the impact of her words. Chancellor Morthus cleared his throat, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hillside. The Terran proposal is comprehensive, but it requires resources, coordination, and a willingness to abandon established military protocols. This is not a decision to be made lightly. Then allow us to demonstrate, Fontaine said. She pulled out a data chip, holding it up for all to see. This contains complete intelligence on a Kreth fuel processing station in the Helion sector. It's heavily defended, considered untouchable by conventional assault. Give us one ship, one squad of volunteers from any species represented here, and 2 weeks. We'll take that station offline and prove that the Kreth aren't invincible. The challenge hung in the air like a blade. I found myself standing again, surprising even myself. The Vornak's sovereignty volunteers its stealth frigate, the Silent Dagger, and a squad of our special operations soldiers. Lieutenant Commander, you'll have your opportunity to prove your methods. Fontaine nodded respectfully in my direction, and I felt something unexpected. Pride, maybe, or vindication for trusting my instincts over my prejudices. Other delegates began volunteering resources. The Meridian Collective offered technical expertise. The Thorians provided advanced armor systems. Even the traditionally isolationist Kashan Unity contributed intelligence-gathering assets. Within an hour, Fontaine had assembled what amounted to a multi-species task force, small but lethal, conventional by appearance but radical in intent. We'll need 2 weeks for planning and preparation, Webb said, reviewing the offered resources on his datapad. Then we strike. And if you fail? Ambassador Threxus asked. Fontaine's expression hardened. If we fail, Ambassador, then you'll have lost 1 ship and 1 squad. If we succeed, you'll have a blueprint for fighting a war you can actually win. I'd say those odds are acceptable. The council adjourned with a mixture of hope and dread swirling through the assembly. As delegates departed, I approached the human delegation. Lieutenant Commander, I said, extending one of my 4 hands in the human gesture of greeting I'd learned, I underestimated you once. I won't make that mistake again. She shook my hand, her grip surprisingly firm for someone so small. Ambassador Kelrith, I don't need you to respect my size. I need you to trust my judgment when we're in the field. Can you do that? I thought about her destroying a Titan-class war machine. I thought about the Apocalypse-class weapons bearing down on all of us. I thought about my own children, safe for now on the Vornak's homeworld, and what kind of galaxy they'd inherit if we failed. Yes, I said simply. I can do that. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Good, because, Ambassador, what we're about to do, it's going to rewrite every military manual in the Federation. And it starts with accepting that sometimes the smallest fighter throws the biggest punch. 2 weeks later, I stood on the bridge of the Silent Dagger, watching through the view screen as the Kreth fuel processing station loomed before us. It was a massive installation, bristling with defensive weapons, surrounded by patrol ships, exactly as the intelligence had suggested. Fontaine stood beside me, reviewing tactical displays with calm efficiency. Our joint squad, Vornak soldiers mixed with human specialists, waited in the drop bay below. This is insane, I muttered, not for the first time. Probably, Fontaine agreed, but insanity is just sanity from a different perspective. Ready, Ambassador? I looked at her. At this small human who'd taught me that size meant nothing. That tradition could be a cage. That survival required evolution. Ready, I said. And as our ship dove toward the station, shields down to avoid detection, flying a trajectory that every military academy in the Federation would call suicidal, I realized something profound. The humans weren't just teaching us new tactics. They were teaching us to see the galaxy differently, to fight differently, to survive differently. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what we needed to face the darkness ahead. The raid on the Helion Sector fuel station would become legendary, studied in military academies for generations. But that's a story for another time. What matters is that in that moment, watching Fontaine orchestrate chaos with the precision of a surgeon and the audacity of a madwoman, I understood why humanity had survived their brutal homeworld. They didn't just adapt to challenges. They thrived on them. And as we began our assault, I found myself grinning, all four of my arms ready for combat, following the lead of someone a fraction of my size who had twice my courage. Size didn't matter. Strategy did. And the humans had just taught the galaxy how to punch above its weight.